Shane, you were being so quiet. Will you call your meeting for? Look into that.
As a special work session.
Oh, okay.
We'll call our special work session to order.
I'll hand it over to these people.
You want to start with the introductions?
Let's start with introduction. Abigail.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm Abigail Elder, your city manager.
Elsa Williams, County Administrator.
Jennifer, your county chair.
Ed Weathers, Commissioner.
Doug Stepina, City Councilor.
Chad Munzer, County Commissioner.
Welcome.
Arthur Babbitts, Commissioner, District Two.
Letty Marty, Commissioner District 1.
Lenny Juvena, City Councilor.
Grant Wilson, City Council.
Megan Saunders, city council.
Mark St. Miller, City Council.
Paul Blackburn, Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. I think this meeting originated from a letter that the city received from the commission in August of last year, asking us to have a conversation or a meeting about annexation. Since then, I think both groups have done a lot of homework. City Council held a meeting on January 6th, a half-day meeting where we learned a lot about annexation, the pros, the cons, the different things that need to be considered, the legal framework for it. And then I know that the county also held a meeting with the same facilitator, I think in March. So I appreciate all of the work that everyone has done already. We have a little bit of a agenda, and I think it's really going to start with the county doing some education for all of us.
Okay. Well, thanks, everyone, and it's nice to have everyone in the same room. I think having electeds in a shared environment like this, when we share so much in common, is really important. And so glad to have the discussion. So after our March 25th meeting, these two met, Mayor and our commission chair met to talk about holding this meeting today, because I think after the discussion about annexation and the in-depth review that was done, it was really, you know, we all came to the understanding that this needs to be in the best interest of the city, and it's the city's prerogative to move forward on that. But as staff, we thought it would be a good idea and discussed the merits of getting together as staff and talking about some of the other issues that we are seeing. And so we met, and the map that is in front of you is a piece of that work. And I am new, so I am also still learning many of the issues that are before us. And so I brought resources. And so today we have Mike Matthews, who is our environmental manager with our Department of Health. And then Eric Walker, who's our community development director. And so they are here to walk through a couple of the things that they're seeing in regards to issues that are arising within the urban growth boundary for consideration. And I would also echo that per my understanding, for the letter that was sent and initiated, one of the areas in the county's strategic plan is to where we can help facilitate the development of housing. And so I think this letter emanated from that desire to look at those areas that can be developed. And the city is the purveyor of many of those services that help to facilitate housing. So I would just echo that sentiment that I think I have heard carried through our board. Yes, and so Eric and Mike are.
Yep. Yes, I would say I was remiss in letting them introduce themselves.
Oh, yes.
And so let's do that. And then I just want to run through like just a little what I think our agenda looks like and hear if anybody has any additions or corrections. So should we start with Mike?
Hello, I'm Mike Matthews, River County Health Supervisor in Environmental Health. Eric Walker, River County Community Development Director.
Will Norris, Urban Renewal Administrator.
Dustin Middleton, Director of Planning and Zoning for the city.
Adam Schmidt, Public Works Director.
Thank you. I think we also have some folks online. Chris and Dan, do you want to introduce yourselves?
Sure. Chris Longinetti, Finance Director for the City of Hood River.
Okay. Is Dan on?
What's that?
Is Dan on? Okay, Dan Kearns is our city attorney. He'll be joining at some point. And then Sandy and Leonard, do you want to introduce yourselves?
Hi, Sandy Galvez, Human Resources Manager for the City of Hood River.
And Leonard Damian, Fire Chief for the City of Hood River.
Thank you all. Great. As Allison said, I think we have Mike and Eric present from the county perspective. And then any other comments, maybe a short discussion at that point. And then I prepared a short PowerPoint on some of the work the city has done around housing initiatives, and thought we could have a conversation about all the other tools that we use to generate housing as well. Is there anything else anyone wants to make sure we get discussed or gets covered tonight?
I want to make sure there's some explanation of what this is showing us.
I think that will be either Mike or Eric's.
Great.
Great. Fantastic. All right, then I think
All
I'll
right,
hand it over to Mike.
Mike is first up.
Mike, is that your map?
Yes.
You want me to share that?
So I was gonna talk a little bit about two things tonight. First of all, I'd like to say I've been working for the county now 20 years, and this is the first time I've been in a room with all of you guys together. So I think that's awesome. Hopefully we can make it a productive evening. So I'm the environmental health supervisor. One of the hats that I wear is a DEQ hat regarding on-site wastewater systems. So that's why I'm here tonight, is to talk about the issues that we have with some areas inside the urban growth boundary, but not inside the city limits yet. And then first off, I was asked by Allison, since everybody's new here, to talk a little bit about the Windmaster sewer area, which is quite unique in the state. It's one of only 3 areas in the state where it's been allowed for city services to be expanded outside of an urban growth boundary. The Windmaster area is out near the store that's named after there, out Tucker Road, and was developed mostly in the 60s, before there was a lot of land use or anybody in my position monitoring what's going on with septic systems. But what we found out there in the 70s was that there is a poor soil condition, a hard pan out there that's fairly close to the surface. So normal septic systems weren't working very well out there. And we were getting literally toilet paper in the curbside ditches out there. I did some sampling when I first started, and the rates for E. coli were the same as you would get in a raw sewage out there during times of the year in the ditches. So between the 70s and about what's here for my eyes, 2002 is when the health hazard area was established. And that was in May of 2002. So it took from the 70s for us identifying a problem clear to 2002 before we could actually establish this area out there that we called a health hazard. And that took the state Oregon Health Authority and lots of lawyers and lots of time to make this happen. And the original health hazard area reaches from Carter Road, which is off of Lower Portland Drive, Peters Drive, which is kind of back behind that. And then it extends north to Barker Road and to Nobby's or Spotty's Corner, as they're calling it today. And that whole area out there was established as a health hazard area so that we could work then towards expanding the sewer district into that area to serve those properties. So then around 2007, is when the renewal plan was formed for an urban renewal district out there to help pay for extension of the sewer line out that way. And then in 2009 is when the actual district was formed, and it ended up being a little smaller than the whole health hazard. So the actual district now that's served by sewer stretches from Orchard Road, which is right at the intersection there of Tucker Road and Orchard Road, is where the line starts, and then it extends up Shoal Road there along Tucker Road, around Windmaster Corner, and then Off-Speed Drive and the old industrial park, or the old movie theater that's now an industrial park, that's served by Windmaster. All of that end is Gravity. And then from Windmaster Corner towards Nobby's Corner, but it only goes to Dillon Road, Dillon and Janet Road. Those systems all out that way are pressurized systems. Each home or each individual property has a pump in its yard that helps pump the sewage down the line until it gets to Windmaster Corner and gravity down the main line that runs through the high school property. So 2009, we finally got the district formed. 2009, end of 2010, system was constructed and most of the connections were made around 2010. So during that time, I worked closely with the city public works to decommission the septic tanks and document that when those connections were made onto the city sewer. So in short, that is currently the Windmaster Sewer District, that urban renewal district that's paid for all that. I believe sunsets coming up here in 25 or 26. So that money will be going away and going back to the individual parties that money comes from, if you know how all that works. All right, so any questions that I can answer about the Windmaster Sewer District? So it's really only one of three, I believe, in the state where it's been allowed to have city services extended beyond an urban growth boundary. Yes.
When you say sunset, you mean it's completed its tasks? So has everything that was on the original list for Windmaster Sewer been done? Has it run out of debt, or is something else happening?
Well, the debt was satisfied quicker than they anticipated, so I think there won't be a problem with the debt being finished out. I believe that's just when the original district was set to sunset is in 25, and there is no plan to extend any more services to reach all those areas in the Windmaster District. As far as I know, once it's sunset, we're done out there with sewer connections.
And we do need to bring in Elaine to do a kind of a final look at that to make sure that
But generally, there's not a sunset date for urban renewal.
right. We need to make sure that we reached out.
This was a really odd one. I signed it. I was signed the original one, and it was definitely an odd beast. So there might be something funny there.
Yes.
So with the urban renewal being a smaller area than the health hazard, like how is development or sewer dealt with in the other chunks of the health hazard area?
Well, I deal with it with on-site wastewater. So somehow we try to figure out a way to treat the water and use a septic drain field to dispose of it. There are some problematic lots still there, Carter Road. There's some Peters, there's some small lots back in there. It's primarily very small lots that are problematic. We have treatment systems now that allow for smaller drain fields if we treat the water first. So we may need to use some of those on repairs in the future in those areas. As the DEQ agent, there's a rule that basically gives me the ability to allow a reasonable repair. So it's very vaguely worded. And I use the reasonable repair a lot in some of the other areas that I'm going to talk about next here. But anything else about Windmaster? Did that answer your question? Great. Okay, so if I can make this work, it'll be amazing. Because I don't see a share screen thing there anymore. Oh, here it is. All right, somebody's doing it for me. Perfect. So this is a map of some of these areas that I have particular concern about. Eric will talk a bit about this stuff too, I believe, but
Jen, could you slide the picture of the faces off of the legend? Thank you so much.
so I might walk out here just to point to some of these. There's four major areas. We've got this one up here, which is off of Rocky Road, first brown spot there. This one is behind West Side Elementary. This one is kind of the Avalon neighborhood, and then this one is right on the edge of the urban growth boundary off Elliott Street. So all of these areas are already developed to high density. So all of the lots in these areas are pretty small now when it comes to repairing on a septic system. Areas that I find of particular concern are in the Avalon neighborhood. There's a lot of very small lots there and a lot of unpermitted systems we have no record of. So I usually have to go back and forth with the city, find out if this property is even served by a septic system or are they paying a sewer bill? That's usually the first question. And sometimes we've found somebody paying a sewer bill that's on a septic and somebody on a septic that's opposite. So you never know what you're going to find in that neighborhood. But I am concerned primarily about the very porous soils in that neighborhood. So it's basically pea gravel. So when the Missoula floods did their thing around here, for some reason, all the pea gravel dropped off right in that neighborhood. So it's as deep as I've ever seen it. You can dig as deep as you want to dig, and you'll never find anything but pea gravel. But we do know eventually there's a water table down there. And it's also right on the cusp of Indian Creek there. It's above Indian Creek. One of the local groups, River Keepers, did some work on Indian Creek doing testing for E. coli a few years ago and found higher levels than would be expected. And then one of the theories was that it could be coming from that neighborhood up there through those very poor soils and ending up in the creek without time to actually get treated. Many of those really small lots have seepage pits in them instead of regular drain field. So a normal septic drain field would be anywhere from 150 to 200 lineal feet of drain field that's spread out in the soil to absorb the water and the microorganisms in the soil help break down the waste. In some of those small lots, they basically just have a big pit that was dug. So it may or may not go through a tank. Hopefully it goes through a tank. Then it goes to this pit and then it just leaches straight down. So it doesn't spread the water out like we'd like to see it spread out to give the soil microorganisms time to do their thing in there. That and it's very hit and miss in there. So you might have one neighbor that has a septic and the next door neighbor is already connected to city sewer, even though they're outside the urban growth boundary. It's very hit and miss. So you never know what you're going to find in the Avalon area. The other area that's closest there is behind West Side School. There's 3 streets back there that are all on septic systems. Soil's a little bit different over here. It's a little sandier, which is good as far as treatment goes. But there's still very small lots with hard to find room for repair. So if city sewer services are never extended to that neighborhood, we'll likely be looking at treatment systems when those fail to be able to fit something on the lot that is even close to meeting rule. And the same scenario kind of in that area up there around Rocky Road. Rocky Ridge Court is a cul-de-sac that's back in there with fairly small lots and really, really rocky soils. So there's not a lot of fine soils for the organisms to do their work. That's mostly just giant boulders. So even if you can find enough room to dig a drain field, once you dig the drain field, you don't have any soil to go back in there. So we've had that challenge in that area. And then the last area is on the opposite end down off Elliott Street. So the north or the south side of Elliott Street is outside the urban growth boundary. So anything on the south side of the street is going to be septic system. Anything on the north side of the street is within the urban growth boundary, and some of it is within the city, and some of it isn't. So down at the end, there's a little street down there called Cameo Drive down at the end of Elliott. There's some small lots back in there. And we've done a few repairs in there in the last couple of years where city sewer wasn't feasible for them, even if they could have annexed. It was still a little too far away. So those are the main neighborhoods that I have dealings with on a regular basis, mostly due to small lots. And we find things when homes are sold. So nowadays the banks are particular about lending on properties that have septic systems that aren't permitted. So if we run into a system out there that's been in the ground for 40, 50, 60 years, that's not permitted, and somebody's buying the home, the bank wants a certificate of completion on that, we have to figure out something we can do to get them that certificate on those particular properties. Yeah.
You know the age of those developments, are they all from about the same time period or?
Well, it's pretty variable. There's a lot of infill, but I would say the majority of that stuff is probably from the 50s, 60s, I would say. Eric's kind of agree. It's varied, but
So those septic systems are 70+ years old.
right, yeah, could be.
Thank you.
And we expect a normal drain field to last about 30 years, 20 to 30 years. So if we've had something that's never come through our office, that's pretty suspect. You know, if it's been there 60 years and they've never even come in for a tank replacement permit or a new drain field or anything, we'll try to figure out what's going on in the ground out there whenever we can. And then my first step before I issue any permits in this area is to coordinate with the city public works to find out if the city sewer line is legally or physically available. So the resolution from 2016 makes it so most properties are not, the sewer line is not legally available to most lots that are outside the urban growth boundary and haven't been annexed into the city yet. I believe that's pretty much all I have, except for questions.
Everyone understand the statement of the 2016 resolution? So state law says that when a property is within 300 feet of a sewer line.
It's within 300 feet and it's both physically and legally available. So it would be considered to be not physically available. Let's say if you had to go through two neighbors' yards to get to the line and they weren't willing to grant you an easement, it wouldn't be legally available. Or the resolution from 2016 means that if you don't annex into the city, the sewer is not available to you. So you might have to get 2 or 3 neighbors between you and the city line to annex with you to make that happen. That is usually a difficult prospect.
Does the county have the regulatory tools to say we are not in any of these brown areas, we're just not going to approve septic fields and force them into our thing, and we'll say we're happy to annex you, and then you can connect to the sewer, and that's already our policy, right?
Well, yeah, I don't know that I have any jurisdiction to force that. We usually have to work with what we have to work with. So if the city won't allow a connection, then I'll work with the property owner to come up with some kind of a reasonable repair.
The city is happy to connect them, they just have to get annexed, right?
Right, it's the annexation that can be tricky. So if you're not already abutted to the city line, getting the neighbors between you and the city line to come with you into the city is usually the hurdle.
And we, we did that for the places along Belmont, those 2 developments on Belmont, right? I mean, that was sort of the first effort with that policy in it. Maybe it was a pain, but it worked.
That was for the new development, though.
Yeah, that's true.
It's a little bit different.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a question?
Yeah, do you know how many properties would be an issue within these brown areas?
Wow, that would be really tough.
Help me understand why. Is it just because?
Well, because I don't have a really thorough count of who is and who isn't already connected. So I could, give you a property parcel count for those areas. We could figure that out with our GIS guys, but off the top of my head, knowing which ones are going to be problematic in the future or which ones might be problematic right now, we just don't know.
Because if we're gonna come up with a solution to address this, I think we have to understand how many properties are affected. So it sounds like the way to solve that is to have somebody else come in and.
It would be a great project for like an intern or something to take an inventory. It would be a matter of looking at what do we have in our files for permits, what do the city have in those areas for connections, and then probably do some knocking on doors on the ones that we don't know for sure and ask the property owners.
This might be for Adam. Do we have a good sense on our side in terms of what's hooked up in those areas and at all?
I think for sewer bills, we have a
But to the point of the
Yeah.
billing may not be right.
Right, Billy might not, sure.
But starting with the parcel count seems like it might get part of the way towards Gladys's question. The parcel count plus the sewer billing would
General.
hopefully get within 50%.
I have another question. You mentioned that in some areas it's rocky soil, sandy, grainy. How do we fix that?
Well, there's no fixing that. That really, the soil is what it is. So it really comes down to when we do a DEQ permitted repair, I can allow certain lengths of drain fields and certain types of soil. So sandy gravelly soil would allow a smaller drain field, say for a single family dwelling, about 150 lineal feet. Whereas the rocky Rockford stony loams that you have over there off on the Rocky Road and Rocky Ridge Court would allow, those require 300 or maybe even more than 300 lineal feet. So if you're looking at a regular city lot parcel that's say 1,000 by 2,000 feet or 1,000 by 1,000, a quarter acre or less, it becomes really difficult to come up with that lineal feet.
Thank you.
All right, yeah, if nobody else has questions, thank you for letting me speak tonight.
And thank you for that, the colors on that legend. That's very creative.
That's the GIS stuff.
Otherwise,
So take it down just so that the can see.
Thank you, Mayor Blackburn, councilors, Chair Ura, commissioners. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight. It's definitely understood that there are many parts, moving parts related to the topic of annexation and urban growth area land use policy. The focus of my presentation is not so much to highlight the obvious policy issues that you guys are grappling with, but more so to emphasize the city's current annexation policy and the effects that it has on the county from a planning and public service perspective. And I also understand that annexation may not necessarily be the magic bullet that's going to resolve all of these issues that come out of today's discussions, but it certainly is one potential piece of the puzzle worthy of further consideration. Other pieces may include revising the UGA management agreement, looking at the sewer connection policy and possibly allowing some additional flexibility under certain circumstances, or even discussing the city taking over plan administration within the UGA. So from a county planning perspective, the city's 2016 resolution precluding new sewer connections outside the city limits overall, I think, was a very good decision. The resolution effectively resulted in the elimination of past practices of allowing the extension and use of city sewer outside the city limits, which has resulted in dense, fully built neighborhoods with now no incentive of being annexed. Without an incentive, it's unclear when these developed neighborhoods within the UGA would ultimately be incorporated into the city. In the meantime, property that is of a developable size and located beyond these developed neighborhoods are in many cases isolated from the city limits boundary and therefore effectively impeded from being developed further. As described by some, the complex and extensive process for annexing property that is detached from the city limits makes development of these lands oftentimes impractical. And so it would seem like from the city's perspective, bringing some of these neighborhoods into the city would be beneficial, not only in getting them into the city once and for all and realizing some long-term tax revenue, but by extending the city limits boundary closer to these properties that can be developed, it can provide some meaningful, more cost-effective way of developing those areas. We would point to the Mike Kitts development of 2017 as an example where the city assisted the applicant by annexing 34 properties within the Bow and Hazelview additions off Belmont Drive to accommodate an affordable housing project, which resulted in the creation of 18 dwelling units. And had the city not assisted them with that project, it's possible that that development may not have happened. So that can possibly be used as a template for future projects. And so it would seem like implementing strategic annexations within certain parts of the UGA may actually serve as a way to spur new development and provide housing opportunities in areas within the UGA area where such opportunities do not currently exist. And may even allow the city and county to take greater advantage of recent legislation designed specifically to encourage needed housing, including on lands within the UGA, without either making more lands within the UGA available to development, either through strategic annexation or some loosening of the city's sewer connection requirements where it makes sense. Opportunities for additional housing will continue to be hampered. Another challenge that is important to note has to do with certain operational inefficiencies and decline of customer service. So in 1997, when the current urban growth area ordinance was adopted, it was developed so that the regulations within the urban growth area would be the same as they are within the city. And that way, when property was ultimately annexed, there'd be a smooth transition of those lands within the city, and they would be conforming lots at that time. In 2003, the city and the county adopted the current version of the UGA management agreement, which outlines each jurisdiction's responsibilities. The last time that the UGA ordinance was amended was in 2011, and then the urban growth area management agreement has not been amended for over 20 years. And so, as you can imagine, there have been many changes to the city zoning code since then, which has resulted in several discrepancies between the city and the county's zoning ordinance. This creates the potential for the county allowing development within the UGA that is no longer conforming to the city requirements, which conflicts with the original intent of the agreement. And so unfortunately, there's very little incentive for the county to update the UGA ordinance when most of the provisions being adopted would not be put into effect and would not be implemented by the county, since most of the development first requires annexation, and therefore those folks would be sent to the city for implementation. Now, that's not necessarily always the case. We can point to building height restrictions, accessory dwelling unit guidelines, short-term rental allowances, stream protection guidelines as examples of where development and land uses are still happening within the urban growth area, but in conflict with current city standards. And so the issue of inconsistent implementation of zoning regulations is certainly a factor that should be given some consideration as part of these discussions. The final factor is customer service. On one hand, we have an urban growth area management agreement that identifies the county as the jurisdiction with implementing authority within the UGA. Yet when folks come to our front counter, we often just end up sending them to the city for service because their property ultimately is going to require city sewer. Unfortunately, this puts the customer at times in an awkward situation. And even though city and planning staff work very well together, there are certainly times when customers get sent back and forth in order to provide needed service. And so that too is a factor worth some consideration. So in a nutshell, these are the main inefficiencies and challenges, and certainly there are others, that we as county staff, as well as property owners within the urban growth area, are having to face on a regular basis, given the past reality of decades of sewer being allowed to be extended in the UGA, resulting in urban neighborhoods, while now trying to adapt to a new way of doing business that involves strict sewer connection requirements, which have resulted in a number of unintended consequences. And therefore, although imperfect, it seems like some strategic annexation may be a beneficial tool as part of a viable long-term solution. That's it.
If you see somebody behind my head, please call them.
Councilor Rivera.
You mentioned something about city takes over plan administration in the urban growth area. What would that entail, or what does that look like?
Well, certainly would require some modification to the current UGA management agreement. And what the details would look like, I don't know. Dustin and I have talked about that in the past, but certainly there's negotiations and how that would play out, I'm not sure. But it's certainly, you know, one option that, you know, instead of folks coming to the county planning counter for service, just to be sent to the city in many instances, that the city would be the one who would implement the land use regulations within the urban growth area. And so people would just know that they would come to the city first. How that works in practice, I know that there's been jurisdictions that have done that. I think the city of the Dalles is one example. But how that would play out, I'm not sure.
Okay. And I guess within that, the city would implement it, but would you still need to adopt city code for the urban growth area for the city to implement, or does that get rid of that?
Yeah.
Convoluted?
Yeah, so those are the details that we'd have to work through, and I'm not sure how that would ultimately work.
Right, okay.
Do you have a hot list of properties that are sticky, and are you communicating those with city staff? And so there should, I imagine there's a map somewhere that says this one is tricky and this one's tricky. And
well, I would say that you know, there are certainly properties that come up from time to time where people come to our office and say, hey, I'd like to do a subdivision or a partition. And then ultimately, you know, our response is anything that requires new city connection, whether that be a new land division or a new home on vacant property, would require connection to city sewer. And so we send folks to the city. And whether those projects ultimately get developed or not, we don't find out until, you know, later on. And some of the properties that we know that people have come and talked to us about have not ultimately been developed or annexed. And so the reasons behind that, I don't know, but I'm sure there's a lot of different factors. But I would just say that there's certain properties out there that we've identified as probably good candidates for development, probably south of the, you know, in the Avalon area. But there's some properties that are over there south of West Side School that are large enough to provide some meaningful development that are extended pretty far from the city limits boundary currently. Okay.
I had a question. You were talking about the management agreement, and then you stated that there's key legislative that we should be taking advantage of. What were you referring to?
Yeah, so right now, as part of the, I can't remember the word, the bill ultimately, I think it was 3395, House Bill 3395 was the housing omnibus bill. There was a lot of provisions to encourage, it's probably the middle housing bill where, you know, it's encouraging certain housing densities within city limits as well as urban growth boundaries. And some of those things we aren't able to take advantage of. Let's say, for instance, where duplexes are now as an allowed use on all residential properties. Well, the fact that a duplex would require new sewer connection, that property can't be developed to that extent because unless they're able to get that property annexed. I know with accessory dwelling units, which are now allowed outright, the city has said as long as you're not making a new connection, but utilizing the existing service, then you can do accessory dwelling units. And so we have had some of those, which has helped.
And this isn't the new bill that Governor Kotek just passed, right? Or is it a different one?
I think it's part of that.
It's part of it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Let's see.
You had mentioned that you recommended a strategic annexation strategy, targeting particular areas. Is that, how granular is that? Is that ad hoc based on particular properties or requests as mentioned earlier, or is that more area or small regional focused?
Yeah, I think I think it's a broader discussion. I think there's a lot of, like I said in the beginning, there's a lot of moving parts to the annexation issue.
Yeah.
Planning just being one of those. The other one is, the services that are available in that particular area, whether they, they're already served by sewer. Whether they're already developed, where are some areas that, the city would like to, ultimately grow. Maybe there are some properties that we know about where developers are looking to develop, but aren't able to because of the cost and the complexity of going through that annexation process. So I mean, putting those all together, putting our minds together and figuring out if there are some areas, and we certainly haven't identified any areas that we're pushing for annexation. It just looks like, let's look at the big picture, and maybe there are some areas that make sense for inclusion.
To that point, Bow Edition was mentioned earlier, as a good example, good model. Why, beyond the city made some concessions for annexation? Can you expand on that a little bit?
I'm sorry.
Can you expand on why it would be a good model? I know you said that the city made some concessions, help with annexation, et cetera.
Yeah, right.
That was a big swath of land, one developer. So kind of, different example than the piecemeal sort of.
Well, the way I think we looked at that was not, it looked like an opportunity for partnership with the city and the developer to extend, to include an area that's already a developed neighborhood. And incorporate that into the city boundary, while at the same time extending the city boundary line further out to areas that contain larger property that would be more available for a larger development project.
So was the Bow District annexed?
A portion was, but not all of it.
Yeah, I have a little bit of background with that, except the house in the Bow Edition. That was partly driven by the city, part of it was driven by developers. Anytime a developer develops an area, they have to draw a map to determine triple majority, whatever it is, to meet the criteria to do it. So the way the developers drew the map is part of Bow Edition was annexed twice, part of Bow Edition was annexed none. So if we were to take, if the strategy was to be ad hoc or like we're targeted in a developer sort of way, would a weakness of that strategy be that same sort of implementation, where we see little parts and pieces that are taken out and other pieces are left behind, as we see on our current map, versus going from road to road and taking pieces or chunks here and there? Are there pros and cons to doing either one of those?
Well, I would defer to your staff. I think they're certainly, just looking at the map, there are areas, and some of those are highlighted on the map in yellow as areas that seem like they're either almost completely surrounded, almost like an island. Other areas that are, on three sides, and maybe there's areas that make sense to draw the boundary line at this location to have a nice clean boundary. Certainly those get tweaked over time as other annexations occur, but that may be an opportunity or something that is of interest as well. All right,
Thanks,
thank
Ann.
you.
What's next?
Those were our two big pieces around annexation specifically, and then we were going to open the conversation a bit more to housing. So let's take a pause here and just talk about what we've learned and other thoughts about annexation.
So this map doesn't include the west side urban renewal district. That's not part of the.
What does this map include?
It looks
Mike
like.
or Eric, what are the boundaries? of this map?
Annexations are.
Right, and I'll be presenting a little bit about housing initiatives, and I have a map of the renewal, if that's helpful.
So there's definitely a broader area, just to look at areas that were either islands or having environmental issues, and so not necessarily correlated towards that.
Right, like this doesn't include the one word.
Correct.
Well, and West Side Urban Renewal doesn't cover Tanner's Orchards or the Avalon neighborhood, for like, confident of that. It doesn't, tell me I'm not confident.
No, they're not in that section.
Right.
There's aspects of the west side of the renewal district that are not included on your map. There's aspects of your map that no relationship to the west side.
One interesting part of today's story was at the same time as the Mike Kitts forced annexation of a part of Bow Addition was occurring, adjacent was a straight up market rate addition called Barrel Springs, much larger house. And we did the same thing. We helped the Mike Kitts pathway to annexation occur. We made the Barrel Springs lawyer do their pathway to annexation. And so as Grant said, Doug, we made some concessions. I mean, we helped the Mike Kitts pathway get done, because you got to knock on the door and say, hey, would you be willing? And my father-in-law was like, sure, sign me up. And but Barrel Springs happened in a slightly different way at the exact same time, getting that pathway that was legally wider than a cherry stem, but not complete. Going forward, it's the question of, like, well, what's our goal? The best thing is when the development occurs and the annexation occurs. The worst thing is when the development occurs and it's not annexed. The middle path of like, yeah, okay, I won't develop. That's not really our goal, but sometimes that's the outcome. So I'm interested in those different situations. Arthur.
So I just want to make sure everyone is following it. There are three very distinct conversations that have been going on here, and it can be awfully confusing because even in each example that you gave, there's often two of them are implicated. The first one being the DEQ issues, which Mike addressed, and those are kind of easy to understand, but also kind of independent from the other two, which is the ease of administration and the conflicts that have happened between the city and the county in I think it's 20 years since there was last rectification of the code issues. And just as an example, think about short-term rentals and what's happened before then, since then, and imagine when you, if you do then go and annex a piece of the urban growth area, which has an active short-term rental operating, and do they get the legacy treatment or not, and just all the messes associated with that stuff. So that's number two, and number three is housing. It's generation of housing, and that's what I'm most interested in seeing, and that's what I think what we talked about most in our Board of Commissioners meeting is that we all know that the lack of buildable land is one of the major things driving up the cost of housing in the community. Certainly a strong pressure on cost of housing, and that if you're looking at everything from affordable housing just to less expensive housing, or slowing the rate of growth of climb of housing prices, that you need to look at that annexation as one of the possible tools. So three separate things: DEQ, ease of administration, and generation of housing. I'm personally most interested in housing.
Arthur, is that a separate discussion? Like, are the ones that we have on this map, are those annexations that would lead to more housing, or is your?
This map, Mike did this, or had the GIS folks do this map to illustrate the DEQ issues, right?
So my question is, if those were annexed, those are not necessarily the same as annexations that would lead to more housing, because most of these are already built out and quickly.
It depends it depends on if they infill or add housing. There's no.
Right, but these are not the opportunity that you're talking about, right?
Well, you don't know until you look lot by lot, because there may be meaningful infill happening there. A lot of our more mature neighborhoods have had a lot of growth in the recent years through infill. I mean, look at the mayor's neighborhood. Quite a bit of housing has been added there in a couple of years, and you would say, hey, there's no room for development there, but there is.
And if I may, I think with some of those properties being sewered, that increases their ability to densify and add houses.
Correct, I have had some calls recently, since the ADU allowance. People asking about how that would work on a particular parcel that was served by septic system. It's quite difficult if it's small. We have to allow for another 300 gallons per day of flows from an ADU. The normal single family dwelling is 450. So you put those two together, you're looking at a pretty large septic system to serve a home that has a single family dwelling in an ADU on it. So I think there would be potential in those areas. for more ADUs.
And I think a lot of what I keep hearing is that we don't know how many of each type there is, we don't know the scope of the issues. And what I was hoping would come out of the end of this is an agreement that we should get the answers.
Quick comment, just for all the county commissioners that haven't heard us talking about this for years and years, which is. City council is very locked up on doing housing positive stuff. I mean, that is pretty much what we talk about. And we're not anti-annex at all. We want to see the whole, we've even said, if the whole urban growth area could come in one fell swoop, that's fine. But there's a whole bunch of reality that makes that very difficult. I think that doing it on a per application basis has not been to hold it back. It's been to encourage a positive integration into the city, and it allows our staff some tools to get the best deal for the city. Whether that's a trail easement or sidewalk or this or that, things that are beneficial to everybody in the long term. Compared to the old school, which we're gonna be dealing with some negative parts of the 70s allowance to hook up to the sewer without coming in and just the workmanship and lack of infrastructure that came along with it. And so, take 27th Street or one of those things that goes up towards Hanners, and it's gonna have to all be redone as soon as there's more houses, because it was let in without a long-term vision of what the infrastructure needed to be. So we're fans of annexation, we're fans of housing. I like the idea of doing this map so we can see where in the already built parts, if we have a sewer next door, Mike can say, no, you have to connect. You have to connect to sewer, you don't have a choice. I think that this is very consistent with the town of how we've talked about it for a long time. You think?
I think that's a challenge, so I don't think we can just, certainly we, at the county, if there are options for that landowner to come within compliance, we can't just say, no, you have to, I don't believe you can, I certainly wouldn't want to do that, so I think that's the challenge there is,
well, if he's on a gravel pit and the choice is come into the city or dump your stuff in Indian Creek, I think it's pretty easy.
well, again, I don't know Mike's, Mike's world of, in that situation, what can I do to comply? And as a property owner, I wouldn't do that. I think it's our duty to give the property owners that options, not. And if the answer is no, you have no options, then no, you have no options, but it's gonna open it up to other ways to comply and not get the annexation. Right? So not every property is gonna be the same.
So I see that there's a balancing act that has to be done here, and I think Mark kind of edged into that, which is there are two families of benefits. There's the benefits that you can get by exacting concessions from a landowner in exchange for annexation. The benefits that you get from bringing larger amounts of land within the city where denser development is allowed and where more orderly development of the infrastructure can be accomplished. And what I don't know is the size or nature of detail of each of those benefits. And I've talked to many of you, many city councilors about this, and I've talked to staff about this, and I still don't get an answer that leads me to believe that I understand the principle. I don't know that you have the data to back up the choices when they come before you. And that's where I'm hoping that we can come to an agreement to start quantifying it, start identifying. I think Eric Walker's emphasis on, let's try to identify some, I don't know if you use the low-hanging fruit metaphor, but I guess I'll use the low-hanging fruit metaphor. Let's try to identify some productive spots, and then have a study be done, have someone actually go and count and identify an economic model of what sort of additional development would happen here, and then what exactions might the city be losing, and over time, what might it get from the tax base that it's expanded. You know, there's a whole bunch of math that has to happen there, and I think that there's some conceptual ideas there, but the math hasn't been done, and I want to see the math done.
I think Megan had a question.
And I'm gonna just go full blunt, but, you know, I think there's generally, I think we've all in agreement that there's benefits to both the city and the county and the community to annexation. I guess to the point of Arthur's study or actual implementation of annexation, or certainly once we've annexed, like there are costs to all of this. And I guess my question to the county is like, are you guys willing to put some money towards this, or are you asking the city to do it?
Towards analysis or towards?
Towards analysis, towards actual annexation costs, if we're doing a broad-based one. Towards upgrading some of the infrastructure in existing properties that certainly aren't sufficient to current standards.
So some of the infrastructure is paid for by the development.
Well, the places that are already developed. That helps.
Well, then that might not fit into this model very well.
Well, that's, I mean, I guess it depends on which model we're talking
Right,
about.
I'm not talking, I was not addressing addressing the details.
Okay, but I'm not just addressing Arthur in this, but it's like there, depending on what our priorities were, whether it's broad-based or strategic, if we're doing the study, if we're doing the actual annexation, like. I mean, part of the reason we aren't doing broad-based ones is because it's a significant cost to the city to do, so I'm interested in, you know, thoughts or willingness or of even ability, yeah.
I think one of the things though that I've heard Arthur say is quantifying the cost, because right now we don't know. Right? So from the county standpoint, things are built to a county standard. Obviously, there's a different standard applied in the city. So quantifying what it means when you say, are you willing to invest? I think that's, you know, the big question mark is that what is the cost benefit?
So maybe, you know, question A of that is, are you willing to invest in quantifying? You know, Arthur's questions.
Seems like, I mean.
Or are you asking the city to do that?
So the first, like, just the study part.
Yeah, let's start there. Because I agree, I have no concept of.
Right.
Yeah. Or what we
So we say, if we say in full blunt, then.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's the best way to get things done. I guess it also falls back on the city and what you really want long term, and housing is a really important outcome. Looking at ways to increase housing in a faster manner probably isn't gonna be waiting for landowner property and requested annexation. I don't know which one is right either. So
We had a
I
map.
mean, if it's super important, then it seems like most of the cost is probably gonna be, but I again, I don't know what that cost looks like, and I mean, those are things we'd have to work through, but is the city really committed to spending the money and or providing, you know, building infrastructure to feel the drinks, build that they will come.
So for our January meeting, we had a map and looked at, you know, undeveloped property, and it's, you know, Hannah's taken out of the equation. It's not very much, and it's places that we're already talking about. You know, I think that my understanding is there's good discussions about what the development future looks like, and they're already talking to city staff. So I didn't see like this big up, you know, there's 100 houses worth of land, and why aren't we talking about annexing that ahead of time? It was more like a little piece here, and a little piece there. Now I could be, you know, that was 8 months ago. So But, and I think this gets back to Megan's thing, Arthur's thing, which is let's get a map and let's identify what we think are the three top opportunities, whether it's the EQ stuff or housing stuff or what, and then do a trade study on the first couple of things, You pick two and we'll pick two. I don't know how we do it, something like that. So I like the idea of testing these assumptions in that sort of way.
I think we should definitely identify what the challenges or the problem is so that we have a plan to work for. But I also want to bring up something that's even bigger, right? We are all elected by our constituents to ensure that our community members have everything that they need in order to thrive. I heard earlier a staff member say this is the first time in 30 years that we've all gotten together, and that's really sad to me. So I'm really hoping that we can collaborate on a variety of issues, because housing shouldn't only be an issue for the city. It should be a shared goal that we're all talking about. How do we even get more housing up into the county, right? So I'm really hoping that moving forward, we can continue to have these meetings and that they're not so out of the norm for us to get together, and what are those common issues that we can talk about, and that we will have to share our resources, and that means money, that means staff time, right? In order to be able to do that, because that's what we get elected to do. And I sometimes sense that it's, for whatever reason, there's work of the ego going on when that shouldn't be the case. It should be, we are all here to serve, and that means that we have to do this together, because siloed work isn't very efficient.
So, Gladys and I got together and talked about this quite a bit. I completely agree with what you just said. On Mark's point concerning what is out there, I haven't studied your maps, but I would like to see, Eric and Dustin sitting together and then coming back to us and saying how they each identify this. But another point I want to make is, we just went through an election. I should have gotten the exact numbers, but something in the order of 20% of the urban growth area population does not live in the city. That's pretty significant, right? That's not an insignificant issue. And I think that would be something that from a governing point of view should be addressed. That's not usually the case. Urban growth areas usually do not have the density of population that we have, or the intensity of development. So we've got something that's fundamentally broken here. We all know how it happened. And fixing it is not, is something that, well, it would address some other issues also.
And what are those?
What are the other issues? Where do I start?
Well, what are the top three?
So from a governing point of view, you have, so I am a city resident, I pay city taxes. My city police and fire are heavily servicing areas that are not paying taxes to the city. So I think that's, if I were one of the city council members, I would be concerned about that. Similarly, for roads, development of infrastructure, of city infrastructure. So when we talk about balancing, when we talk about wanting to exact concessions from folks to be annexed, I think there's also the flip side of it, that we have people who are getting services who aren't paying for those services. So from a political point of view, it creates a sense of a lack of enfranchisement, that people are subject in many ways to the decisions that you folks are making, but don't have a say in this. Even the fact that this annexation discussion happens, and you're talking about effectively what you're going to impose on people who are not able to vote for you, is kind of that's one of the chicken and egg problems here, that I would like to get to the point where majority of folks who are being affected by decisions that are being made within the city council are actually enfranchised in part of that process. And then I do focus then on the housing, that I think that I have talked to, so this is anecdotal, right? And this is where I say, I don't have the numbers. I'm not telling you that I know that this is a good deal, but I keep on running into people who talk about, yeah, I have my house, it's on 3 acres. I would like to develop, but I can't. Because to develop would involve figuring out how to leapfrog and it's just too much of a problem. And I've talked to Dustin about this and he said, no, they've never turned anyone down. So I don't know how to square these things. I'm getting conflicting information. When I get conflicting information, I like to see it put down in writing so we can then actually debate it. That's 3.
I had a friend who wanted to put a yoga studio upstairs in her house. And she was all excited and they mapped it out and they painted the walls and then they were finishing painting and they went like this and realized the ceiling was right there.
Right.
Can't have a yoga studio in that room because it's too short. Turns out there's multiple characteristics to like having it be feasible and workable and like all of these examples.
Right.
Some are ones that are quite aligned with our goals. Some of them are going to be terrific profitable project for some developer and God bless each of these, but I'm not convinced that annexing all of it is the way to maximize utility. Maybe it's saving our pennies and buying another piece of land or buying your piece of land, or there's just a lot of, and spending the money to get all those answers is not in the budget we're about to approve. I mean, it's just a priority.
Well, I think that's the point. I don't sense there are really any egos involved. It's just we both have the same end goal, but we have different complexities to get to that point. I think that's the issue. It's not that, oh gosh, the county doesn't do what the city wants and you hit the nail on the head. There's budgetary issues as well. What's the benefit? We are elected to serve the people within our district and people in the county, and squaring that with what's good for the whole community versus what's good just for the county. You know, again, from a budgetary standpoint, it's
hard to easy. It's hard to do cost benefit analysis when you don't know the cost or the benefit.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Well, if we're concerned with housing, and the way I see it, there's 2 kinds. There's housing that has some kind of deed restriction, which will keep it affordable forever. And the only way to do that, you know, being on the planning commission all these years, being on the Hope Board, I mean, no matter how many times we talk about it, the only way for that to happen is for you to go out and buy land. Because there is no other way, unless someone donates it, to have a deed restriction. And as far as the rest of it, it's going to sell for market value. So no matter who pays for the infrastructure, the houses around here are going to go for market value. And whether or not the costs of the infrastructure may be passed on to the owner, but the savings, if more of the infrastructure is done by the city, I'm not sure those will be passed on. So I'm not sure we can do anything about the cost to the people wanting to buy houses around here. I'm not sure that paying more of taking responsibility for more of the infrastructure will be passed on. So again, those are things that are, I don't know if you can do a study and find out the answer to that, but.
It's an economic analysis. I mean, I disagree with most of what you said, but it's an economic analysis. We get to the core of it and figure out if I don't know what we're talking about.
Maybe this is an opportunity for me to talk just a little bit about some of the things that the city has done or is exploring around housing, some of the other tools that we have. So I have a little PowerPoint, and feel free to interrupt me at any of these. They're really just points of discussion, and many of you, particularly on council and some staff, were here when these things were created. Some of them predate me, so I trust that you're going to jump in and help explain things as I go along.
You're asking for a history lesson?
Short history lesson.
I was gonna tell you about the end of Elliot with the.
That's okay.
There we go.
That we just found out. Yes, I do want to see pictures of that.
Just a tiny bit of background. Of course, much of this kicked off with the housing needs analysis of 2015 that the city did to meet Housing Goal 10, which requires us to provide appropriate types and amounts of land and to provide opportunities for development. So that was really the catalyst for that's a framework for a lot of the things that I'm going to share here. Of course, 3 findings from there, no surprises to anyone: limited land supply, few opportunities for development specifically around multifamily housing, and a decrease in housing affordability. And that was back in 2015. You know, that looks quaint, right? Today, as we think about, the last 10 years. So three kind of strategies or pieces that were identified. The first was to increase production through efficiency of use of land. Number two, preservation. How can we regulate and manage things? And that has been a lot of the work that the city did in short-term rentals. Can't overstate the importance of the work that the city did. It was hard, difficult, very engaging work, and I really applaud those who were on council at that time and our current council who has continued to maintain that. And then finally, partnerships, as we talked about, deed restriction, developers, other pieces. Since then, the city has done affordable housing strategy, but things I've talked about here apply not just to affordable, capital A affordable, but also workforce housing and attainable housing. The things on the bottom there are the things that as of 2022 were already done. If you have ever met with me, I have forced this piece of paper on you. So many of you have seen this before. It's page 7 of the affordable housing strategy. So short-term rentals, as I mentioned, townhouse update, the city adopted a middle housing code. We're under 10,000 people, so we're not required to do so, but the city voluntarily did that. We adopted this strategy, and then you can see we have the new urban renewal district, established a nonprofit tax exemption. And then you can see some things that are further on there, all the way up to land banking, and possibly a general obligation bond to buy land and infrastructure.
So you're done in 2 years. What's the problem?
I know, I'm on it. So there's an intersection here, right? Of policy and market, land and capital. There's a real limit to what the city can do in terms of affordability, right? The developer must control the site with reasonable acquisition costs. The city has some policies such as zoning, density, design requirements. They must allow the developer to build a profitable project, right? If we put too much weight on it, the project might sink. And then there has to be demand. It doesn't seem to be a problem for that. Oops, back here. There we go. So this is just for any government, this isn't specific to Hood River, is some of, on the left is the light touch, right? We can make brochures about how to build a house or how to add an ADU, all the way to we can put money on the table, right? We can acquire land, we can subsidize pieces. And so this city, I think in many ways has explored a little bit of everything. I think we have brochures. And then we definitely have been talking about things on the more intensive piece. So these are strategies currently underway or under consideration. I won't talk about those in great detail. I'll highlight some of them coming up. So the first big effort, of course, is the West Side Urban Renewal District. This is Chair Ewer. This was the map that you had mentioned. It's a lot around Cascade Avenue, because that's a street that needs a lot of infrastructure work. And then areas that are undeveloped or underdeveloped. This Urban Renewal District has 3 goals. It has parks, roads, and housing. So, and those are all to implement things the city already has, the transportation system plan, the housing strategy, and the multi-jurisdictional park plan. And so I also want to recognize, as part of the city's investment, we have hired for the first time our urban renewal administrator, Will Norris, who's dedicated to working on our urban renewal projects and really has already been able to move things forward more quickly than we otherwise could if it was myself and Dustin and others trying to fit it in with our other work. So exciting, great news. 780 Rand Road housing development is now fully funded. We received the last piece of funding from the state. It's about $36 million. It's about a $60 million total project. It will create 129 units of affordable housing. By affordable, I mean 30 to 60% area and median income. So this project started. In fact, I believe the developer award was my first meeting here. So it must have been like the first week in November 2021. And we think groundbreaking will happen in January 2025, winter, early 2025. So it's taken that much to line the funding up, to do the planning. So these are not super fast projects. The city's investment in this, of course, it's the city purchased the 7 acres. The city is providing CET construction excise tax dollars. The county is providing construction excise tax dollars. There's a congressionally directed spending, $3 million. State legislature recently provided $2.4 million. A lot of cooks in this kitchen to make this fantastic meal. Other things that are underway, we have just kicked off a development code audit. My apologies to Eric Walker, our code's gonna divert even more. But definitely as we review our code, which some of it's out of date, some of it's almost contradictory, it can be hard to use. How can we make it easier to use? And how can we prioritize the housing we want to see in Hood River? So we've just kicked that off. We're starting with stakeholder feedback and we'll have an audit. It's a 2-year project. We also have just kicked off system development charges study. We've learned that there's not a lot we can do to make preferences for smaller homes, but there's a little bit that we can do in our calculation of SDCs. They have to be legally defensible and they have to be transparent, but there is a little bit of wiggle room there. So we're working on that. And then finally, it's not to steal Will's thunder, but very soon he'll be presenting to the Urban Renewal District or Urban Renewal Board about possible developer incentives that are happening around the state and other places where the city could actually bring cash to the table, or we abate property taxes, or other options to actually on that far end of my spectrum to truly be more invested in partnering with developers. Those are my quick things. I know there are a million other things that the city has worked on and continues to work on, but those are the ones I just wanted to highlight.
I always bring up things that are in Washington State. I'm learning work. So great to see that you're updating your system development charges. Is there the ability within that? We were able to put goals and policies in place to incentivize areas for sewer. So in areas, you know, since there is goal direction to help where there are failing septics, that there might be some ways through the SDCs to incentivize hooking up to sewer, which might help with some of those upfront costs. I didn't know if that was part of it.
It's a great question. And I don't know, we've just started the 90-day period. So at our last meeting was the kickoff. So, but we can pass that on to the consultant, and I know our finance director is online. So
Awesome.
Great. And do you want me to call on people? Commissioner Babbitts.
I just pulled up housing needs analysis because I'm trying to remember some of the numbers
Yeah.
from it, and my memory isn't quite that good. But
It is a
can you
decade
remind me,
The document is almost a decade old.
Well, there was the 2019.
Oh, great.
Okay,
My apologies.
2019 up there. I'm looking at 2015 housing needs analysis, but remind me what the annual housing generation that is needed.
I thought it was
100. 100 is the number I remembered. Okay, and what have we seen on average for the last decade?
50 past decade.
Okay,
And we'll undershoot it this year.
so we're undershooting by about 50%.
Yeah, it's dire.
And that kind of, that to me, that's the focus in my
Mhm.
mind, that I know we have the need, we're not meeting the need. Is there something we can do to meet the need
Great, thank you.
effectively? I know that's what you're focused on.
Thank you, Abigail. That was a great summary. Well done.
Super, thanks. Can I add one thing that's not in this, but I'm just gonna go rogue here, which is, one of the goals, of course, is preservation. It's not annexation, but, we staff and I think council are very concerned about mobile home parks. And so we have 2 mobile home parks in the city. One is, I think, pretty stable. One we are very concerned about. And in the county, I think you have some mobile home parks as well. One is like 7 units that's currently for sale. The whole park is for sale. I think it's on. I can find you the details. It's on Zillow. I was gonna say it's off Tucker. I don't know if there are other mobile home parks in the county, but that is, naturally occurring affordable housing or deeply affordable housing. So to be concerned about that. And then my last comment would be on Mr. Baker, correct? Mr. Baker is the president or the board chair of the Big River Community Land Trust. So when you talk about deed restricted, he's here in the audience. And the city recently donated a tiny piece of property to Big River for a single family home. And the county has been a great partner for Big River in that process because it required some, I think you have provided some not fee waivers, but who have paid the fee on behalf of the Big River. And I think you've also waived some like setbacks and some other requirements. So I want to thank you all for your work on that.
That reminds me of something that I want to make sure I should say to you guys while you're here is, and there's an infinite amount, I don't know about this, but if y'all can get yes on an Odell intensification, urbanization, perimeter, growth, something, that would produce housing, that would benefit us.
Yeah, come on, Eric, what's taking?
So, for my, that's, I said.
Did you want to have the septic discussion now or later? Sean?
I'm sure there's a long list of thorny issues.
Odell's nice enough to date, isn't it?
It's what?
The Odell one's like, they just did the big upgrades, like.
Comparatively.
Well, since I'm talking, I do.
Say it.
Well, so I do, I mean, I guess this is the hard, but with the group conversation is, so Abigail was talking about everything we've been working on, everything we are working on. Obviously, that's a lot of our budget for this year, next year, staff capacity. But all of that is, reducing barriers or actively incentivizing more housing development, housing types we want. I think annexation fits into that. And I guess, so some of this, and I'm gonna speak for myself, I can't speak for the rest of council, is we need to figure out where annexation fits into those priorities of that strategy and of the other work we're doing. And so since we've got you here, like how would you want to play in that conversation or, yeah.
So if we have those same budget issues, so we're done with our budget, you're done with our budget. Now I can just spend a ton of money here. What I would suggest is I would like to get Eric and Dustin to sit down together for a nice long lunch. I will pay for the lunch. Got it?
It's on record.
On the record, I will pay for the lunch out of personal money, not taking your money. So that they can identify a potential.
Yes.
List of options.
Plans.
List of strategies or options, not
Thank
just
you.
one in particular.
Yeah, really.
A few different scenarios or options available.
Just a handful that's manageable, that we
Yeah,
might
yeah.
actually be able to say, yeah, let's in next year's budget fund with this.
With pros and cons that we talked.
Absolutely.
Exactly what I wanted to say.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And by the way, we got our biological opinion on the bridge.
Finally,
4 years.
that's forever.
Oh, wow, congrats.
Yay.
How does that feel?
I'd love to have lunch with Eric. However, I think one thing that resonated with me with Arthur is this is, we can talk about the planning aspects and the community development aspects of it, but there really is an important kind of a global consideration that has to do with governance and the fiscal impact analysis of this. One part about community development is that, and this is not, it's an expensive study. It's not a one-off mysterious study. There's people that do this, and it's the way to evaluate your return on your investment, the needs of the area, be it septic, be it lack of utilities, be it lack of streets, be it antiquated infrastructure, and the idea of what's the return here. That you can boil this down to financial return, and that's one aspect. There's also the idea of we start expanding the population here, incorporated in the city, now franchised into this decision-making process. That's not particularly popular. There is a resistance against moving into the city out of where you are now, and we can have the various reasons why that's the case. But I think prioritizing the efficacy of annexation as a way to move the numbers on housing. We have maps, we have analysis, we have every parcel, we have every account, I have every decent idea on how many units we can produce out of this. I think that's a good exercise to have in 2 years when I'm done rehabbing the entire development code, which has been neglected for 40 years, and we have the will and momentum to do it now. Because no matter what you bring in, if you bring it in if I prioritize it and push the development code off any further, I'm going to bring it in under a code that doesn't particularly work well for anyone, whether you're in or out. That's also gives Eric the opportunity to not have to update 13 years, we have 13 years, we have 15 years. 15 years of code updates that I've done and the city's invested in that time. Instead, taking and making the most of your staff time by implementing a rehab code. So I can do lunch. I'm gonna lower the I'm gonna temper the expectation that annexation of these pieces is necessarily the numbers that we can get out of here. But happy to do it and happy to give you analysis. And we're gonna be 6 figures into a fiscal impact analysis if you want to invest to get a real number for this. That's my once over. I was sitting here.
A one-time expenditure for a long-term impact for both of these communities, so we have to think about the long term.
Well, that's your budget. I just do the work.
And remember, he said he's paying.
That's one lunch. I don't know, he was paying for the lunch, not the fiscal impact analysis.
Eric, did you have anything to add?
Not really. I would say that, again, there's a lot of moving parts to this. There's a lot of factors that are outside of just pure community development, pure planning. I can speak mostly to the planning issues, but there's also, there's sanitation issues, there's infrastructure issues, there's, the broader policy issues that are going to gauge this in a certain direction or not. So I think those are all factors, and we can certainly hash through some of the planning issues. But certainly, there's other people that are probably part of that conversation that need to be heard.
Thank you.
So I have to buy lunch for more than 2 people, that's what you're saying.
Well, it sounds like it's been pretty clear though, that there is direction that is being given, is like, hey, we have people that are in need of housing. We have people that are being displaced. We have people that are moving to other areas who work here and commute. Like, the problem is not going to go away in a month. And what are the things that we need to be prioritizing? How do we adjust our budgets if possible? How do we do a one-time allocation of dollars? Yeah.
One of the parts that we haven't talked about that I also think is interesting is we've had some awesome rogue actors in this community. I don't know how many of y'all know Mike Kitts or Greg Crafts, or there's a newer fella whose name I'm forgetting, but like they decide to build at a different market segment than other people have, and dozens and dozens and dozens of units have happened because they thought it was a cool idea. And for many years, we struggled to give them support because we couldn't come up with a policy that would help that and not allow some other less useful housing to happen with that tailwind. So I think part of that is we're in a less worse spot than we would have been. I mean, a lot of small houses went up through no fault of our own, like just got done behind the middle school. And so that's a super fascinating part. Maybe I wish we had some more of them. Those guys, grew up and went on and did other things, but I'll be interested to see if we can have some semi-collaborative private sector instead of just having to make the rules for the desired outcome.
Mike Kettler's the name you're looking
Kettler, thank you. Yep. He's young.
Yes. And are we talking about, I'm sorry, I had to step out. I was trying to get out of a different meeting I'm supposed to go to. But are we talking about the first group of areas that we'd like to annex potentially that are brown? Or the whole thing, does this also include the annexation of the urban growth area that's going into the West Side urban renewal?
I think they're different situations with different motivations. For me specifically, no offense, Mike, I don't care about the brown thing so much. My priority is not to solve someone's awkward septic problem. Sorry, like that's not, if it turns into dense, lower cost housing, I'm down, but that I didn't, nowhere in our priorities does it say that that's like the most important thing. That's a mixed obligation.
So are you, I guess I just wondered if you guys were focused on the whole area, because I had to step out. Were you talking also about the urban renewal area?
Did you spend like a comment?
No, I didn't. I just missed the part where you begin with yours. And so I just wonder if we're talking about the existing area, or are we talking about the area to be annexed that is the urban renewal area?
So I feel like what I've mostly been hearing is that we're more interested in what will produce the most housing at this point, not necessarily the already developed locations.
Oh, okay, so all of it.
Well, I would think targeted to specific locations that have the least developed or the most ripe for development.
Oh,
land.
okay, and so some of those might be places that are next to the city limits in the new area. All right. Thank you.
But I guess to, comments back there, and I'm gonna maybe not be getting to where Arthur was trying to go. If you guys have a map and you say just from the lens of housing development, here's, I don't know, the top 10 things we'd like to target. Would that give us a starting place to then say, okay, in our, our work plan sessions this winter, our next budget cycle, like let's dive in on a report for that versus the entire 400 acres of urban growth area?
Or what about, hey, it turns out we both think this is a highly productive area. Let's just do it and try and see what happens.
Study it. What is
No.
Yeah.
What is do it?
Yes.
I mean, I think then you get into
Moving forward.
Dustin's point of, because it's highly developable for housing doesn't mean it makes sense for the city financially for other reasons.
Yeah, if we commit and choose to take on that liability, we need to know exactly what it is, what we're signing
Right,
up to do.
if you can identify an area that's small enough, you can focus and you can say, okay, this one we could do without spending $400,000.
Just do the study on that
Yep.
area. Okay. I mean, I guess I'm assuming from the lunch, they're gonna agree on the areas.
I think the lunch sounds like a great idea.
Yeah.
It's a big low hanging.
Thank you.
Low hanging fruit focus.
We know you like your lunch.
To plan our lunch, I could come up with 10 properties outside the city limits. I could probably come up with 20 of them inside the city limits that I'd invest more time and energy for the return on units. So that's the easy thing is the larger, more readily accessible development properties where I want to spend my time and attention to, in the name of turning over, developing affordable market rate just housing for the city, for its workforce, for its visitors, for its ultra affluent, for its unheard, unseen, is predominantly within the city today. I'm not going to pick up something magical outside of UGB that's going to overshoot what a railroad's going to do. And I'm not saying there's not helpful, beneficial pieces and we should be looking at it. I'm just saying, if I'm going to pick my priorities and those that are ripened and ready, I already have them at 6 levels.
Thank you.
So, but again, there's value out there. But if I'm picking my top 10, I would rather not enrich a speculative property to make it harder to develop than to wait for a better opportunity to see it develop.
So is that gonna get you to 100 units a year?
That,
Is that going to get you to 100 units a year?
well, that's all depends on the market. Because I don't build any housing. The market needs to move that.
Right.
But I think even marketability of housing within the city limits, within the commercial zones, within access to existing infrastructure will better my chances of getting to 100 units per year.
And I would opine it's gonna take all of our continued hard work to stay at 50.
Yeah.
If we get multifamily on Cascade, it's much cheaper for our land development.
And that's an important feature within that 100 units. It's not 100 units per year, no matter how they look. It's split amongst, the city in its higher development was developing 80% single attached dwelling units and 20% other. The housing needs has told us, you need to shift that. You need to shift out of single
Yeah.
dwellings. You need to shift that into multifamily and housing that needs infrastructure if you're going to meet the needs. So it's not a numbers game, it's a what product is coming online. That's what's going to serve your future needs. And that's an important consideration when it comes down to zoning, to access, to roads. It can't be at the end of the pipeline. It's gonna have to be served either by the taxpayers, the ratepayers, or the developers. That's how it's split up.
What's the zoning code, maximum? I should know this.
My-
Density per acre, yeah.
It's minimum in C2, those areas within the urban renewal zone, it's minimum 11 per acre in C2 zones. There's no ceiling, there's a height ceiling, but it's a floor that's set. There's a long story to that too, but
Flip
What are we-
side of that
do we know what we're
question,
building to? What the average, like the permits that are coming in, what the density is? I was just trying to equate it to 5 acres and we get 100 units, it seems much more manageable. If your permits are coming in at 30 units to an acre with that density. I'm saying numbers that I mean.
No, not yet. I know what you mean.
where? In the city, outside the city?
Oh, yeah. in the city,
There's a lot of answers. Aggregate, it's gonna be diluted. If you wanna think about a townhouse, it's one house for 2,500 square feet of real estate. But we get, it's not a lot of ways.
So other side of Allison's question for both of you, I mean, what's left in the urban growth boundary? Is it all R1, mostly R1? Does it have higher density?
Very little in R3, some R2, Rich Hanners, again, who's not interested in purchasing. He's at R2, but it varies. I don't necessarily know if that's the big driver of how much housing we get out of it, honestly.
Well, but so zoning code changes could change future options out there.
Well, and state law changes have changed options for you,
Well, yes,
so.
for sure.
I think mostly for staff, but would working on the urban growth management agreement to get it up to date, is that make sense given that we're updating our land use code? B, does it provide some efficiencies that would be beneficial beyond the hypotheticals here? I mean, it's a very practical, it's a tool that's being used by both staffs. Is there a reasonable amount of work to get that up to date that would make Eric's life happier, and not kill cities? It's just a question.
Please be
Certainly, I think that there are some efficiencies that could be gained through that process. But I think it's really in concert with a discussion about implementation within the urban growth area as well. Because right now, the system is set up to where the county is the provider of service within the urban growth boundary. It was set up with an idea that development would happen within the urban growth areas without restriction on sewer connection. And so, with that policy change in 2016, really put that management plan on its head. And so really it's not being implemented as it was envisioned. And so I see that as kind of a two-part. One is amending the code, one is amending the management agreement, and then three is discussion about ultimately who provide that service within the urban areas.
Yeah, John Roberts and I started working on this when we both had what we thought was free time for a minute. And it's certainly the code, it doesn't reflect the operating realities. So I think it's an agreement that needs some time and attention. I think both of us, I know it always appears on Eric's whiteboard, and I think it's on mine as well. It's just one of those operational pieces that it's not prioritized in work plan, and it's not prioritized in day-to-day being responsive to customers. And that's a tough thing. It's not only the limited new development that's occurring as a result of the city's policy to require properties that are going to have access to city utilities be in the city, that has really shifted those discussions to us in the city. You want to come develop. It's just the reality of what it is. I don't think it reflects the UGMA or the UGA agreement. But I think we continue to do our business in spite of it.
I'm never gonna forget that.
I'm sorry, Sid?
The UGMA.
So where are we in this conversation?
I heard two outcomes. The first was lunch.
Top priority.
And Abigail and I are gonna have a table close by, but we'll buy our lunch. We just want to eavesdrop. So it sounds like, strategic annexation discussion, and then second is the. How do you?
Ugama.
Urban growth management.
Update. But I would say that, I think on both of our parts, from a staff capacity standpoint, we're down a lane.
Right, I mean, that's the
Yeah.
operational reality.
Right.
Yeah. So I think what I heard laid out here though today was like a year long. Getting to it for the next budget cycle, but putting the pieces in place in the next little while in terms of the strategic. Great discussion.
Yeah.
Is that sufficient enough to address, for example, this entire Avalon section on the south side of town? Because I haven't heard any sort of agreement as to what we're gonna do with that part of town or the rest of the west side of town, or any concurrence between our groups.
Thanks for coming, sir.
I think I heard, I'm not prioritizing.
As an
Sewer.
example,
Bye.
Where would that fall on the list?
right, so we had a little back and forth on, it's going to cost one or both of us some amount of money to go some amount of distance to bring those folks in. If those folks are brought in, potentially it opens up that land for development. Potentially they could increase the housing stock, whatever it is, who knows? But there are a number of issues in specifically that area of town, as an example. And I haven't heard any discussion or concurrence as to, for example, how to approach that sort of situation.
I feel like I've mostly heard that's lower on the priority list for staff capacity and funding.
Okay.
So
I do think it is with your system development charge study. I mean, it is an area that, in doing a sewer plan, understanding that you've got areas within your urban growth boundary that have failing septic. It's opportune that you're doing an analysis right now that could consider incentivizing some of those areas.
Sure. So in the meantime, let's say hypothetically, the septic systems fail. Before we come up with any kind of plan or agreement, then what?
Then they have to figure out how to get on sewer.
Or Mike figures out how to serve them otherwise.
Well, they'd be looking at probably doing a $30,000 repair on a septic system, putting in a treatment unit.
We just saw an example of this, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
Annexation where-
We did, and somebody came to us for an exemption to be annexed.
Right.
So are we going to see more of those, and are we going to make that policy?
And I
Is
should
that
note,
going to be practice?
that property had, the sewer was running in front of it.
Yes.
And so there was no additional cost. I think our calculation is to run sewer is $550 per linear foot. For our, just to think of like what it would take to get sewer to Elliott, I think we looked at that as, I remember 700 feet or something like that.
Sure. My question is more, are we trying to avoid those kind of examples, or are we not?
Well, if we allow staff to identify the low-hanging fruit, and there's someone makes an argument that one street in the Avalon area is low-hanging fruit, and it should get looked at just like the other developable stuff. I mean, it will enable ADUs, it will enable other, new housing types, for townhouses where 2 or 3 lots were kind of thing. So it's not housing impact free. But I think we don't know enough, as we've said, so let the low-hanging fruit identify itself, and if one of them is in that area, then we study it, and if not, we talk about it again 2 years from now.
Can I get some clarification on what is the city's goal in terms of housing generation?
More units, more smaller units, more diversity of unit types, more multifamily.
Okay,
It's
but
not numeric.
But, you know, we don't
So it's
have
not
that number.
numeric, but the mayor made a comment about that we're, with a lot of work, we're lucky to produce at half of the rate that was identified through the numeric analysis of the housing needs analysis. So what I'm trying to follow or to understand is, so what does the target look like then? Is it more and more and more, but we're seeing we're not making.
We haven't cracked the multifamily nut.
Right.
The west side urban growth area gives us some tools. And the stuff that Dustin's doing gives us some tools to hopefully change the whatever paradigm that is keeping developers from building that type of housing.
So
Then we'll have a flood.
Well, yeah, so I'm saying, are we gonna turn a corner or are we simply, watching as we get further and further away from the goal? And my concern here is that we talk about economic analysis and if we don't have a solution, then we need to consider a massive demographic change, and we need to look at the fact that we're working on a completely different problem. Because if we're going to keep losing pace instead of gaining pace, then for everything we want to say that this is going to stay a livable community, economically viable for people starting families, starting careers. If we're giving up on that, then we have a completely different picture. We should be working on different problems. So I'm looking for some clarity of going, I'm just looking for some
I
clarity.
would say we're not giving up on that. We're putting as much money as we have flexibility to put besides essential services pretty much towards housing.
And so we're expecting to see us turn the corner and start to see an acceleration, or?
I can tell you, we've permitted more multifamily units in the past 5 years than we have in 2 decades before that
Right.
combined.
But it
So,
was zero in the 2 decades before that, right?
right, so,
Yeah.
so the number
Yeah, that's easy.
Yeah, but so we permitted a multi-number of family projects. What we do is we're seeing them stall out at the feasibility and cost of money issue.
Right.
So I can get them through entitlement, get them approved.
They don't get built.
They're like, when it comes to, the issue is, and I think this is a good point, is the city does not produce housing.
Right.
So we prep it, we rely on the private sector or our partnerships to do so. Our partnership where we've invested funds and we've outlaid money is showing fruit. It took 6 years to do so. So in terms of moving metrics, we're gonna have more affordable housing being developed hopefully into next year, pending a good next year with our project and partnership than we have in decades and decades before. So percentage wise, we're going in the right direction. Project wise, we're going in the right direction. We're moving the needle, we're moving product into the pipeline through the process where we have control until money becomes cheaper or until these projects are built for cheaper by non-city forces. They're ready to get off the ground as far as we are. Our sphere of influence, or we start to subsidize. I mean, that's further.
But unless we start to see the results, then there is a world in which we're working on the wrong problem.
Sure.
Right?
West Side urban growth is just a baby, right? It hasn't even started to use its toolkit. So that's largely focused on just this issue. So I don't think it's the time to say we need to throw the baby out with the bathwater and try something new.
Well, it's just the lack, I guess what's sort of set me up, sorry, Paul, but your comment about, we're lucky to meet half the need. I really have to understand what the goal is, and it sounds, Megan, you said that it's not numeric, but at some point it has to be numeric, or else we won't know that we're not getting there. And if we're not getting there, we have to do different things. We have to act differently.
I would argue that keeping pace at the 50 during the COVID Zoomtown hockey stick event is incredibly impressive. 50 means more than it did X ago. So that's due to the good work of folks at this table and there's a lot that we don't control. Like Dustin says, we don't produce housing. We're working hard to create conditions that will improve the output.
I guess I want clarity on what you're asking. If we don't have a numeric number and therefore we're not reaching it, are you saying we should give up, concede defeat and move on with our lives? Or are you saying we should just be trying new strategies? Because I think that's the city has
You
been
get to
trying
choose which.
strategies continuously and has a continuous list going forward, like.
Right.
So I don't really care what our number is. We're not meeting it. We aren't gonna meet it. We need to keep going.
Right, but you have to do something with that number, right? So you just identified two different paths you can take with that number, but you didn't, in that last statement, you didn't say, we don't care what that number is.
Well, I guess.
You care what the
I
number is, you
don't,
just make a
because
decision.
I'm never gonna do the path where we concede defeat. And just give up and say, okay, no one can live here if they make less than 70,000. So if we're always on the other path, I don't need a number to say we need to decide if we're gonna keep going.
Well, I think the number could be 100, and here's all the tools that we've done or that we're developing to get us there, because unfortunately, it takes a long time. I mean, the property on Rand was bought in 2020, and we're talking about groundbreaking taking place at the end of this year. That's a long time. So to me, the number is always going to be 100, but we're halfway. So I mean, I'll take that as a halfway victory, knowing that in reality, it should be 100, but these tools that we're putting in place take a lot of time in order to get to that number.
We'll reach a point where we have massive, so we currently have an economy that is industrially based, industrial and commercial based, with durable goods manufacturing being high in the economic production of the Hood River County. We will clearly reach a point where that's not possible anymore because we don't have the ability for people to live here and work here. And we can't, I guess I'm just saying, I have to keep monitoring that. I can't not look at that. I can't say, well, it doesn't matter because I don't want to go that path. Because if we don't have a choice, then we don't have a choice. And I'm not. Yeah, I don't have any other way to put it. I don't want to live in that community, so I guess I can say at that level, probably you and I will both be moving at the same time, but that's not.
And
That's
certainly
not a real
in
way
my
to address
coffee
it.
shop conversations, plenty of people saying that that's not happened already.
That's what,
That's happened already.
yeah, but there are actual numbers that show that's not the case.
Well, no, because that's like, how much do you tolerate driving from Carson? How much do you tolerate, I never bought anything on Oak Street? How much do you, that it's already happened, that it's already become the town they don't want to live in?
We have had an increase in industrial production though, so I know that industrial production has not left town yet.
So that's the metric
That's one of the metrics. I'm asking you, how do you look at what you measure as success? What is your goal? Just trying to appreciate kind of where we are today. I mean, maybe it's just being pedantic, but I feel like you know,
10 years.
It helps me understand.
10 years of 50 doesn't make me bet on 100 next year. We've been working hard on this.
The 50-100, that's not, sorry, if I focused on that, that was something that I remembered from the analysis that was done before. It's the nature of that work. It's the nature of that housing. I completely agree with that, but if you want to describe the goal in different words, that's great. I just haven't, I'm trying, I think.
You were insisting on
maybe
numeric,
pretty close to that.
But I think what you're saying is, if we're gonna say, are we being successful, that we don't have a number that lets us know if we're being successful on how many houses have been
It may not be a single number. I think there's a bunch of things you're looking at, but.
How much,
Go ahead.
how much of this depends on how much money the county and the city want to put towards this? So we can talk about policy all day, but somebody up there, one of the guys that do the work while we opine, suggested that the three options are system development, taxpayers, and developers.
The cost, and that's really the infrastructure.
So the infrastructure cost is that.
Developer, ratepayer.
And that is one of the
Taxpayer.
things that the government agencies could pay more. And so is that something that we can afford. And if we spend that money, is it taxpayer money? And if the developer doesn't want to spend that money, the houses won't get built. I mean, I think what Dustin says about the city doesn't build the housing is, we can talk all day, but this developers or the housing group, the Cascade Housing, are able to build houses. And so I guess I'm asking, is this a question of how much both of our entities are willing to spend on this in terms, and we would be spending the taxpayers' money. Of those three buckets, we would be spending the taxpayers' money. So is that what this decision is about?
Well, I don't know if I'm gonna answer that question. I wanted to just say Commissioner Babbitt's, Will has been working on and interviewing developers as to like what are the needs, right? As to what would move the needle for them if we look at different incentives. Two quick stories for that have been discussed publicly at council. One was a development at 13th and Taylor. We worked to make a $2 million loan for that project. McKed was also involved in that. That still was not enough to move the needle for that developer. And then there's a developer interested in Stonehenge.
Hedge.
I get it wrong every single time. And that development is probably going to require some kind of traffic control device at Cascade and Mount Adams. And that is a big ticket item that that developer has, in conversation with staff, has said that will, to create, I don't remember how many units was, but it would probably require a $7 million subsidy from the city. So
I was in that meeting.
it was 3.6 and correct me, Will, that subsidy for Mr. Cody's development.
Yeah, I'll have to look that up.
I think it was 3.6 for in infrastructure costs, and then the rest was a direct cash.
I think we only get the first one.
Do not have sticker shock yet. This is not new information.
No.
It's been a while.
But just to say, like, we talk about what is, to bring money to the table.
Yeah.
Those are two examples in which the city has actually entered conversation with developers, and money we could bring has not been sufficient.
And in that Stonehenge example, I
We
remember
will have more data. We'll do a bigger study.
doing some quick math, it was gonna be $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 of city money per front door, per unit.
Most of what you guys do, most of what we do with the county is policy, right? That if we don't let anyone build multifamily housing because we zone against it, then obviously it's not gonna happen. If we zone to make it easier, then we enable it, that doesn't mean it's going to happen. And that's, I completely understand all of that. I don't think I'm saying anything magical here. I'm just saying that underlying all of this is that our economy depends on housing that people who are working here and generating economic value can afford.
Right.
And if we're not capable of generating that, if it will not be generated even because of, you forget about what we do, if the world situation is such that it simply will not happen, then we have to start thinking about this being a different community.
When you're zoning for mobile home parks, does that eliminate the developer issue?
The city has doesn't currently have zoning for mobile home parks, we just have the two existing. It's something that we could consider, I think.
But then you're buying manufactured homes.
Right.
So you're not dealing with the developer at all, and you're creating homes like overnight. You drive them in.
I mean, like if the city purchased a property and then did mobile home park with a manager, right? Yeah.
Is that something you can zone for? Can you zone that specifically, it's only, you can have a zone that is specific to manufactured homes? Can you do that?
There, do you want to do it?
Most of the zoning is hostile to it, right?
There's some limits to what you can do without having to take, I don't think Chris is wanting to talk about
mobile homes.
Mobile home parks, but yeah, it would have to be done carefully if you're gonna take all development opportunity away from someone, but for one project, there's a property rights balance.
That's why I asked.
Yeah.
Chris.
Yeah, thank you. I think that I want to, I guess I can't get my video going. There's been a lot of conversation that I feel is at an emotional level, and we're talking about an economic sort of issue. I do want to outline some numbers, right? So if we look at Rand Road, The land purchase in 2020, right, at $1 million, arguably below market today, plus the money that the city is going to be contributing to that development, is about $25,000 per door, right? The other example that Mayor Blackburn correctly pointed out is the other sort of affordable, right, of quote unquote affordable development was about $40,000 a door, right? So at the housing goal of 100 to 100 units per year, that's a subsidy of somewhere between $25,000 to $40,000 per door, right? $2.5 million to $4 million a year from the city towards contributing towards affordable housing. So understanding that affordable housing is going to require subsidy, I do think there needs to be a strategic understanding of sort of how does that happen, right? There are things like the West Side URA where you're trying to create a demand in an area where infrastructure developments beget other infrastructure developments beget housing development, right? And then there's sort of one-off developments. So when we're talking about annexations that are limited in nature or one-off, it's going to have to be measured against sort of other options, whether they be infill or whatnot. So the idea was floated with regards to an economic study to sort of examine what costs would be for infrastructure and for bringing in things from outside the URA. And I would encourage understanding what those parameters would be and what that study would examine and what it would look like, because it's going to have to be matched against other opportunities the city has to invest money in affordable housing. And so I just want to float that out there because, crafting what that economic study is going to study and where it's going to lead and what it's going to determine, I think is very, very important, because that would be a useful tool for the city.
So if our goal is to generate affordable housing, if that's what we're focusing on, then I think we all know that the housing issue is a much broader thing than just affordable housing. And we can't just have targets and just have focus on the affordable housing side of things. That's the thing. Those are the pieces that cost the money. The other pieces are the pieces where the policy makes a difference.
Yep.
And so, I guess.
Although I think when Chris just said Rand Road is $25,000 a door for the city, the other project is $40,000. It's because the first project, Rand Road, comes with state, federal, right? There are dollars. County, yes. Where the other one, it's really directed at workforce housing, 120% AMI, there is not a lot of subsidy, so the cost can be
right,
higher
and that's the point.
Housing.
Yeah, that's the point I want to make. That the housing, I'm talking about housing to support our economic mix, and we have a broad economic mix, right? So we've all heard the stories about Providence surgeons going elsewhere because they couldn't find housing. And obviously that's not someone who's looking at Rand Road for housing solution. So we're talking about a broad range. And I want to make sure that we keep talking about that. I recognize that you use different tools for different parts of it. I know that you guys put in huge amounts of work on the 40–60% of AMI stuff, because that's what requires that focus. But just make clear that I'm not just talking about that. And in terms of generation of units, I'm not just talking about that, that we have to be doing the policy things to make it affordable, not affordable housing.
Jen.
I so agree with what Arthur is saying, because I find it really confusing when people ask, well, is there going to be affordable housing in Parkdale? We have to have the language that doesn't require that every time he's talking about affordable housing subsidized, there's a paragraph that goes with it. So is there?
Many people say capital A affordable.
Many people may say a whole bunch of things. I'm just asking if we could all use the same, because if we say, I think of it as deed restricted affordable, because that's the only way to keep it affordable going forward, as opposed to attainable, as opposed to just making it possible to build more houses at every level, which would make them affordable to someone. So just houses that are affordable to someone. So we need a shorthand for that, which is maybe deed restricted or income specific or subsidized. Maybe if we just said subsidized, because the truth is the only way that it's really truly The only way that you can dictate that people that make a certain amount of money can live there is if it is subsidized.
I think that's now,
I disagree with that. There's a number of ways to build housing that is not subsidized, that is affordable to everyone. It just depends on building code, cost of land, and quality of the product. A number of different ways to do that.
But I think here the cost of land is just so expensive that without somebody.
Yeah, and there's a number of ways that we can get into that, along with measures 5 and 50 and tax code and
Right,
everything else.
right.
That's a state issue. And if we want to team up and talk to the state about overturning those things, great, we can talk about that.
I was just asking if we could call it housing that, you say affordable housing, everybody thinks something. So, I mean, I would just use that as a shorthand, and I totally agree with what I'm not understanding that,
Sure.
we need a shorthand.
Yeah.
So that we don't say affordable and then have to go back and.
so Maui, my predecessor, Maui Meyer had this, this analogy, which is, he said, you know, there's a ladder with different rungs for the different kinds of housing. In Hood River, our ladder has no rungs.
Yeah.
Right? We're missing every single rung on the ladder. Maybe we have one rung at the top that's holding the two legs together.
Up is where the ladder starts.
Yeah.
There's
Right.
nothing below $500,000 on that.
Right. So obviously we're working, we all know this. There's nothing that's been said here today should be, I'm sure nothing, I could see everybody nodding with everything. So to me, the goal is to figure out some different place where we can start making a dent.
And I'll say some of what I feel like we've been learning in the last few years is beyond just the low income government subsidized affordable housing. In order to get middle income housing that is actually affordable to those incomes, we need to start putting some money into that,
Yeah.
and it does need some subsidy. And that's where part of the housing strategy, a lot of those big strategies was urban renewal districts so that you have money to invest in those, and was potentially a general obligation bond, so you have money to invest in those, because we still have plenty of code to do. We've done some code. We're gonna do more. That is a barrier. And yet, given how out of whack our market is, we need straight up money to make things happen in all of these different rungs, not just the lowest rungs, because they're not happening with the market we have.
But that money will only be available in that geographical area.
Well, the urban renewal money, yes.
The urban renewal money, so that particular money isn't available for the brown and yellow.
No.
It would be for not necessarily giving money to developers, paying for
I'm not saying what it is, I'm just saying that particular.
It's infrastructure building that enables someone, the build or not build equation changes, and then we've enabled someone to build something for market rate that we want, so.
So where are we? Are we gonna keep doing it this? I'm down for that. We're gonna decide we've been here the right amount of time.
We don't get together often enough, is my opinion.
I second that.
So we have two takeaways that you guys both agreed on.
Yep, we'll flesh those out and come back with a timeline and in a rough estimate of what we think those would cost.
So why don't we do a quarterly review like this?
Yeah.
In 3 months, we're gonna do this
Yeah.
table again.
It may be a little bit easier for us to talk the next time.
Yeah.
Can we do it here? Because we only have cups and a faucet. full of
And Abigail can write that.
Off my app.
So clearly we're in more financial dire.
July, August, September.
I'm looking for donations.
And Abigail provides pretty good snacks.
So not, so.
Mark, my bad.
3 months from tonight is Labor Day. So are we talking just after Labor Day, or what do we think? Just after Labor.
That's your call.
How about Allison?
Yeah,
and
they'll
I,
decide.
come back and let
They
you know when
control
we're
our
ready to
calendars.
report, so we have something to present to you before we get back together.
Great.
We do have.
I have a summer vacation planned, so I want to be protected.
Smart. And we do have a joint county planning commission meeting on Odell in September 11th. So after that would probably be better.
But simply having us have the discussion with less than an agenda
Yeah.
and simply
Yeah.
developing this common vocabulary as Jennifer requested. I think there's value to it, even if you have nothing to report to us.
So here's a crazy.
Even if you were both on vacation the entire summer and didn't get anything done.
Ooh, creative.
Several times a year, there is a 5th Monday.
Don't ruin the fifth Monday.
Not the
Fifth Monday
Monday,
Club.
sir.
Oh, it should be the fifth Monday club.
How about we give our administrators full autonomy, control our calendars, put it on there.
You have to invite us, and then you have to run the meeting.
But
Right?
before,
You come drink my seltzer.
yeah, before we depart, I just wanted to add that, we talked about how there's no rungs below $500,000 in Hood River generally right now. Let's say somebody puts 20% of that down, so we're talking about a mortgage of $400,000. Mortgage rates are around 7%, let's say. That's a monthly payment of just under $2,700 a month.
Jesus.
That's typical.
Right.
That's normal.
Sure.
What do you mean? That's normal. What do you-
That's normal, that's normal
That's
expectations for people to take on a mortgage here. Here,
But
yes.
it's, we're not the only place. There was a comment that was made, I don't remember who said it, but somebody suggesting that this is a really unusual, out of whack, I think we're not, I think what we might learn is we're not as out of whack as we think we are.
Right.
It's not out of whack. When we're talking about affordability, consider how much somebody needs to earn just to live here in this market. And so if we're talking about building units or developing properties and units available for people to live in, consider what those units have to be like in order for somebody to afford them.
But you're right, it's true in Portland, it's not that different here. from other
It's
states.
less expensive, it's less expensive in Portland than here. Less,
But
significantly
not as
less.
much as we, right?
Well, it's
Significantly less in
It's
Portland than
very
here.
nicer here than Portland. Of course, it's more expensive.
Let's remember
Depends
there's
on where
housing
it's from.
crisis nationwide.
Yeah.
I
Well,
don't
then you have
think they'll get
multiple
us off
families
of
living
it.
in one home, which increases their gallon per day.
Your usage. Mhm.
Yeah.
So
Thanks,
there
y'all,
are a
for
number of
coming.
factors to go
It's
into
lovely to
it.
have you.
Yeah.
But
We have wastewater, something we can deal with.
But when we're talking about affordability, just something to keep in mind.
City council attorney.
Can we all take a picture?
Yes.